Our reading today comes from the Gospel according to Luke, the 19th chapter, verses 1 through 10. He, that is Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated.
Good morning. My name is Allie Fields, and I'm the Director of Social Justice here at Manchester United Methodist. Now, I don't know if y'all have noticed, but there are no pastors here today. So they're all at annual conference in Branson. So at Methodist churches all over Missouri, lay people like myself are getting the opportunity to step into the pulpit and share our theology. Now, while I'm new to preaching a biblical sermon, I'm not new to public speaking. I was an actress and a trial attorney, and for several years, I worked as a speaker for the Missouri Eating Disorders Association. I am an eating disorder survivor. I suffered with an eating disorder or eating disorders for most of my life. For decades, I tried to recover. And finally, at age 39, I was able to process through and reach a full recovery. Today, I identify as being recovered, which means I no longer have eating disordered thoughts, behaviors, and I accept my body as it is. Now, I've been fully recovered for actually almost 7 years now, and I am not impervious to a relapse. Every single day, I have to take care of my body, of this body who made 2 of my favorite humans who are here today. I have to nourish my body every day, several times a day, and I have to prioritize managing my mental and emotional health. Okay, so circling back to the Missouri Eating Disorders Association. So their flagship program is called Feed the Facts. And they have Feed the Facts for students. That's where we go in and talk to middle school and high school age students. It's a comprehensive, holistic, compassionate eating disorder awareness program. And we have them for students, and we also have them for medical professionals and parents and adults. So I'd go into schools, and I would weave in my own story to add context to the facts and statistics about eating disorders. And I'm not gonna lie to you, it was really hard. It was really hard. And if I'm being totally honest, I rarely looked forward to doing a presentation. Like I knew how important they were, but that didn't stop me from mentally coming up with excuses to not show up. But I did show up. And I stayed available. And what I mean when I say that I stayed available is that when I was in that room with those students, with those kids, I was fully present with them. I wasn't thinking about anything else. They had my full attention. And whenever I started speaking, what always happened was the students would start engaging with me, and they would start asking me questions. And these questions were thoughtful and insightful, right? And it told me that they were listening and they were paying attention. And then after the presentations, teachers and students would come up to me and some would share their story. Some would ask for help on how to support a loved one or a friend, or they would just ask more questions. And whenever I left a school, I felt seen, I felt grateful, content, and happy that I'd shown up, that I'd stayed available, and maybe, just maybe, made a difference for someone. So, when Pastor Andy approached me about preaching today, I was shocked, as I'm sure you can all imagine. But maybe not so shocked. Maybe not so shocked, because there was this voice inside me, this small but strong and resonant voice that said, yes, say yes. So I said yes. And I needed help. So I've been a member of Manchester United Methodist Church for about 10 years now, but I'm not what one might call well-versed in the Bible. Now, I've taken City Jumpers Discipleship 1A class. I'm attending seminary in the fall, so I'm working on it. There's also this lectionary that prescribes which texts are preached on which weekends. Yeah, it's the churchy stuff, right? Like, y'all, I don't know the churchy stuff. But thankfully, pastors Andy and Winter, they do. So they perused the lectionary and presented me with the Zacchaeus, which we just heard read for us. As a side note, I love that when they presented me with this text, they did so like I knew it. Y'all, I did not know it. Now, I'd heard the name Zacchaeus from a VBS song, but I had no idea what the scripture was about. So, I read it. Okay, so here's where I need to reveal something else about myself. It's something I'm not proud of, but it impacts how I navigate the world. So I tend to take things literally. I can get stuck at a cursory understanding if I don't intentionally stay available in the moment and push for a more nuanced understanding. Some might say I'm gullible, but I feel like literalist is perhaps a more compassionate descriptor. So my mom, who's here, is a big fan of idioms. As a literalist, I'm sure you can all imagine, idioms were like a thing for me, right? Y'all know what an idiom is, right? Like, it's raining cats and dogs, mad as a wet hen, I am not buying you those Guess jeans, Allie, they cost an arm and 6 legs. That is my mother. Lining their pockets, that's a bit on the nose. So when I hear those, my brain processes the surface level meaning of the words. For example, if someone says, that's a bit on the nose, my first thought is to picture something on their nose, right? Thank you, it is hilarious. And I'm pulled out of the moment, I'm distracted. I get caught up in my initial reaction and I miss the deeper meaning. Oh, and to all my fellow literalists out there, if something is on the nose, it is obvious or unimaginative. I'm not gonna tell y'all when I learned that. Anyway, I read the passage about Zacchaeus, and as we just heard, by the third sentence, there's mention that Zacchaeus is short in stature. Really? Really, Pastors Andy and Winter? That's a bit on the nose, am I right? Okay, so I'm caught up in this, right? I'm caught up in this, like short, anyways. I keep reading. He's chief tax collector, he's rich, he comes to see Jesus, but he can't because he's so short. So he climbs a tree, and Jesus sees him, and he's like, hey, Zach, come on down from that tree, I'm staying with you today. And Zach is like, me? Oh, heck yeah. He's like, and he's so excited, right? He's so excited, he's like, I'm gonna give away half my possessions to the poor, and anyone I've defrauded, I'm going to pay back fourfold. And Jesus is like, look at you, son of Abraham. You are saved. Happily ever after, the end, right? This was my first impression of the Zacchaeus story, and I would normally be fine with this impression. In fact, if I was just reading it to read it, I would have probably walked away feeling like I had a solid handle on the passage. But I didn't read the passage for a first impression or a cursory understanding. I read it because I was asked to give a sermon about it. I had to stay with the text, which meant reading and rereading it over and over. It meant talking about the text with others and digging beneath the surface to uncover the spirit of the text. One of the first things that grabbed my attention was that Zacchaeus was a Jewish man living in Jericho amongst his fellow Jews and working for the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was a vicious and violent and acutely oppressive regime. And living in such a profoundly unjust society might require one to do things outside of their integrity just to survive. So, my paternal grandma and grandpa lived in Norway during the German occupation during World War II. And I know they both engaged in heroic acts to save others. My grandpa was a member of the Norwegian army stationed in Oslo when the Germans invaded, and for 2 months, they fought the Germans. And my grandma, at age 22, cared for and smuggled her Jewish cousin out of Oslo at a time when the Germans were deporting Jewish people to concentration camps. She smuggled him 150 to 200 miles north to her family farm in Hundorp, Norway, and her family hid him for 5 years. I know they did these things, but I don't know what they had to endure to do these things. Sometimes when you're living in such a profoundly unjust system, you have to do things just to stay alive. So I understand, I even empathize with Zacchaeus' choice to purchase the right to collect taxes. I also understand, but maybe don't empathize, with the fact that he defrauded his neighbor just to line his own pockets. Idiom. It was the system. It's what you did if you could, and he could. He was just trying to survive. And it sucks that he did something so horrible to his community. But he didn't do this in a vacuum. When he took on this role, his community understandably lost trust in him. They turned against him. Zacchaeus became an outcast, and he felt it. He was lonely and alone, and he hated himself. And we know this because of what happened when Zacchaeus showed up on that roadside to see Jesus. When Zacchaeus showed up, he couldn't see. Now, he had a few choices in that moment. As a man of means and cloaked with even the illusion of power, he could have made them make space for him. Do you know who I am? Do you know who I work for? Look, I could buy and sell you. Move. I deserve a place up front. Get out of my way. I feel like we've all encountered or maybe witnessed people who do that. But he didn't do that. He also could have left, right? I mean, he showed up. He tried, but he didn't do that. Zacchaeus stayed. Why did he stay? I mean, he's making money, right? He's rich, and maybe he tells himself that money should be enough, but he can't shake this emptiness inside him, this feeling that he's doing it wrong. Every day he straddles the tension of surviving under the oppressive thumb of Rome and not honoring his integrity. He longs for something more, something he can't even name yet. So he stays. He finds a way to stay available to Jesus. I understand that longing. So there's a point in recovery, at least in eating disorder recovery, where there's a shift from focusing on what you're recovering from to what you're recovering to. And when I moved into this space during my recovery in 2015, there was a quote by Antoine de experience that helped crystallize what that meant for me. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the immensity of the sea. I longed to live. I longed to not only be present in my life, but be an active and engaged participant. I longed to be in a community where I could be myself. Zacchaeus longed for something more, so he found a way to stay available to Jesus that day. Y'all, he climbed up a tree like a child. He may have stayed available on other days too. In fact, I'm sure he did, because staying available is a practice. And we know what happened this time. Jesus not only saw him, he called to him by name and invited himself over to Zacchaeus' home. Zacchaeus stayed available to Jesus, and Jesus found him and met him where he was, which in this case was literally in a tree. Zacchaeus was seen for who he was, and he felt loved, holy, and truly. Jesus, by looking at him, calling him by name, and uniting in community with him, immersed Zacchaeus in the thing he'd been longing for: true love, acceptance, and community. Zacchaeus knew that to reunite with his community, he had to let go of what he thought made him safe: his money. He committed to giving away half of his wealth to the poor and pay back anyone he defrauded fourfold. What an incredible example of healing past harm. He knew just paying someone back wasn't enough. The act of defrauding someone involves tremendous harm. And then Jesus said to Zacchaeus, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." Then he left. And Zacchaeus had to follow through with the promises that he'd made. The happily ever after involved the hard, messy, and uncomfortable work of reconciling with community. And he did it because the feeling of belonging, of being part of a community who will be there with you in good times and in bad, is both life-affirming and life-giving. For the last 7 years, I have focused a tremendous amount of my time, energy, and emotional labor on spreading eating disorder education and awareness. This work matters. Eating disorders are a social justice issue. They impact all bodies. Any body, regardless of body size, race, gender, socioeconomic status, age, ability, and/or sexual preference, can develop an eating disorder. And the devastating reality is that those with more marginalized identities have additional hurdles to recovery. Y'all, we have to talk about this. 1 out of every 9 Americans will suffer with an eating disorder in their lifetime. Every 59 minutes, so the length of this service, every 59 minutes, somebody dies as the direct result of an eating disorder. And up until recently, eating disorders were the most deadly mental illness. They were recently surpassed by opioids. Eating disorders are now the second most deadly. I am passionate about sharing this work because when we lift up the most vulnerable among us, everybody rises. Look, I recognize that not everybody identifies as having an eating disorder. But what about disordered eating? Or how many people have a complicated relationship with food, or feel out of control around food, or can relate to struggling with body image issues, or feeling like they can't or don't know how to trust their body? How we feel about and experience our bodies impacts how we navigate and engage with the world. And a key aspect of eating disorder recovery involves the hard, messy, painful work of healing your relationship with your body, with food, and with movement. This work can bring us back into community. When we take the time to push through our cursory understanding, everybody rises. When we dig deeper into the work of healing, everybody rises. When we reintegrate and reunify with ourselves and our community, everybody rises. So I've been trying to bring eating disorder awareness education here to Manchester for like 6 years. And actually about 5 years ago, I did a presentation. I think it was called The Truth About Eating Disorders, and 2 people showed up. Last year, there was some interest about doing another presentation. COVID, right? COVID did the thing. So there was interest in bringing another eating disorder presentation. So I worked with Pastor Winter. I reached out to the Missouri Eating Disorders Association, and I arranged to have this woman named Celicia Mazzaro, who is a phenomenal therapist who specializes in eating disorders. And she's also just a fantastic presenter. So I arranged to come have her speak. And it was advertised, like it was on the TVs and the narthex, it was in Fellowship Hall, it was in like the emails and the newsletters, and no one showed up. No one showed up. God bless Pastor Winter, because it was Pastor Winter, myself, and Celicia in this room, and Pastor Winter and Celicia were having a wonderful conversation as I sat there and spiraled. I was embarrassed, I was hurt, I was angry, I was exhausted. And I thought I was like keeping it cool. I was not. As we were walking out, Pastor Winter was like, "Hey, Allie, do you have some time to talk?" I said, "Yes." So we went to her office and I cried and I vented and I raged and I felt all the feelings, and she listened and validated and consoled me. And when I left, I felt better. And I felt committed to staying available to this work. But like Zacchaeus, y'all, I had choices. Like I could have, okay, and I'm gonna be honest, I did kind of rage. I was like, oh my God, do they not know how hard I've worked or what I've been through? I could have also given up. I mean, I've been doing this for 7 years, right? But I didn't. I stayed available. And I'm still available and immersed in this work. And it's messy, and it's uncomfortable, and it's hard, and it's also absolutely precious and beautiful and worth it. Because for me, being available to Jesus is inextricably linked to authentic community, our community. I invite you all to practice staying available. Let's keep practicing what it means to, and what it looks like to show up and be who we are. Authentic community, a place where we can be ourselves and we all belong together. Right? That's the church, y'all. Right? Thanks be to God. Amen.